Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah walhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi sahbihi wa man wala wa ba'd. So I'm here with the distinct honor of introducing our special guest, Sister Susie Ismail, who is someone who's doing profoundly important work by having established a very unique initiative for faith-based counseling called Cornerstone in New Jersey. As you all know, New Jersey is the best state in the world, right? Because we both hail from there. In the world, yes, I meant that, in the world. But alhamdulillah, Sister Susie, beyond being many very remarkable things, she's an author, she's an associate professor, she's a mother, she's really someone who's carved out a space in the mental health and counseling realm that has brought so much benefit to people. And I know firsthand people who are benefiting tremendously from her services, as well as I myself generally and regularly refer people to her and to Cornerstone. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless her and increase her. She's here with us actually this weekend doing training for some of our own core staff with Imam Abdul Malik and others, so we're really blessed to have her for that, alhamdulillah. And she's also someone who regularly speaks in the Muslim community about the topic that we have at hand today, which is marriage, which is truly an essential part of obviously any community. And we know ourselves many of the struggles that we face in cultivating strong marriages and maintaining the bonds of our own marriages or thinking about marriage in general. So we have to continue to touch upon this topic, address it, treat it in many different ways. So what you'll come to see this year, inshallah, there's going to be multiple opportunities for us to address and think and counsel on this particular topic. So we have, alhamdulillah, Sister Susie with us to launch much of that. So for some of you, you may know, Sister Susie and I are actually longtime family friends. Our families grew up together in New Jersey. So alhamdulillah, it really is an honor and a pleasure to introduce her to be with us this evening. Barakallahu feeki, tafadhal.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم. So it's definitely an honor and a privilege to be here in Boston with you. This is like my second home, alhamdulillah. I feel very comfortable with the community members here and the incredible initiatives that you're putting together. You've already taken Sheikh Yasser away from us in New Jersey. But alhamdulillah, I think, looking at the community, looking at the growth, looking at the initiatives that are being undertaken here, mashallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put a lot of barakah in all that you do, because it looks like things are moving in the direction that we need to move towards as a Muslim ummah. And as Sheikh Yasser said, the issue of marriage is a very important topic to tackle. And it's something that really shapes the foundation of our communities, of our societies, of our ummah at large. And many times when we look at the status of what is happening in the world at large, we can trace the difficulties that many of us are facing back not just to our government situations, our political situations, which may very well be a mess, but we can also trace it back to the difficulties we're facing in our own homes and the struggles that we're facing in our own homes in building that solid foundation that begins with a solid marriage. So what we wanted to talk about today in the halaqah is we really wanted to present more of an open forum to hear your concerns, to hear your questions. And I know it's not always comfortable to open up and ask the questions about marriage, so we're going to ease into it. We'll talk first, before Maghrib, briefly about marriage, about communication in marriage and the importance of communicating in marriage, but also the preceding steps. Because looking at the audience, it looks like there may be people that are embarking on the journey of marriage but haven't gotten there yet. And then following Maghrib, inshallah, we'll have an open Q&A where you can text your questions or you can ask the questions verbally as well. So when we talk about communication, we usually think, well, oh, that's easy. That's just, I talk, you listen, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us with 2 ears to listen with and 1 mouth to talk with. And the reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth is so that we can listen more and talk less. But we know that's not always the case. And particularly in marriage situations, we tend to see quite the opposite happening, where the listening element is kind of thrown out the window. And instead, the couple in particular, when there are difficult times, when they are going through times that are strenuous, it becomes more about talking than about listening. When we begin the process of marriage, when we embark on the process of marriage, again, many times as young individuals, we may have a list of, this is what I'm looking for. I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. This is what I want in a spouse. But if we are channeling everything externally at the very start of the marriage process as we are embarking on that journey, then we're not taking enough time to look internally first. So the first level of communication in marriage is very much an internal one. And it starts from before the marriage process even begins. It starts with knowing yourself. And in that process of knowing yourself, there's a step that even precedes that. It's knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Knowing your connection with Allah first and foremost, so that you can know yourself, so that you can better understand who you are, what is your comfort level, what are you looking for, what is it that you need in your life without another individual in there. One of the greatest myths that has been perpetuated in marriage is that when you marry someone, you will be complete. And of course, we often hear, well, marriage is the completion of the deen, or marriage is half the deen. But when we are looking for someone to complete us, we will not find the foundation for a solid marriage. Because marriage is meant to be complementary, not a completion of the self. So as an individual, you need to be in a place where you understand who you are, where you understand what your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, in order to embark on that journey of connecting with someone else to build one of the most important relationships with another person that you can build. Now, frequently, when I speak about the topic of marriage in college campuses and different organizations, particularly youth-centric kind of programs, when I am given the flyer or the advertisement about the event, there's one color that is very present or prevalent in those flyers. What do you think that color is? Anyone? Red, absolutely red. So the color red tends to be the most prominent, or somewhere in there, there's a red heart, there's a red flower. And part of the myth that society has perpetuated is equating the concept of marriage or the concept of love towards another person with the color red. But when you look at the color red from a psychological perspective, you see that red is actually a color that incites or initiates any type of intense passion in terms of emotion. So for example, when you see the bullfights in Spain, what does the matador wave in front of the eyes of the bull? A red cloth, right? And what's really interesting is that bulls are actually colorblind. So it's not the red cloth that is intended to incite the bull, it's the movement of the cloth. But the color red is intended to incite the audience to a fervor or a passion that is fueled by rage, by excitement, by anger, not love. And yet we've equated that idea of the color red with the idea of love and marriage. And so we begin to seek out this type of elevated emotion, this type of excitement, this type of passion in our relationships, in the marriage realm as well. But when we look at the Quran and the description that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us of what a marriage relationship is, and particularly when we look at Surah Ar-Rum and the verse which is known as the marriage verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not describe for us the marriage relationship as a place of excitement and passion. Yes, those elements may very well be there and be a part of the relationship, but it's not what sustains the marriage. Instead, our marriages are described as a place of sukoon, of tranquility, as a place of rest, that when husband and wife live together with mawadda wa rahmah, with care and mercy, there is tranquility in the home. And yet many times we enter into our relationships with that hallmark notion, with that idea that we're going to find the color red. But it's not the color red that we should be seeking in the relationship. So we start off with these expectations sometimes, this view of what marriage should be like, or what it might look like, or what we think it will look like. And we tend to communicate those expectations in our nonverbals, in the way that we look at our spouse, in the expression on our face, in the way that we roll our eyes, in the way that we may react to a situation if we feel it doesn't meet our expectations. Rather than pausing and halting our expectations and listening to our spouse, asking the right questions, listening to what is being said rather than jumping to speak, we tend to go to that place of expectations. And without a doubt, we are seeing more and more struggles within our marriages. We're also seeing an increase in the divorce rate. So we are seeing young people, after a year or 2 years of marriage, we're seeing older generations, 5, 6 years, we're seeing empty nesters, 20 years, 30 years. And this is very concerning because we know that it's starting early on, that there are things that are happening in a relationship early on that will lead to the eventual demise of the marriage. So we've talked about the unmet expectations, but also within the relationship itself, there can be that lack of communication or that inability to connect because the expression or the way that someone is expressing themselves is not being interpreted in the way that it is intended to. So we listen with our own ideas and our own understanding of what the person meant to say. So if someone comes home, for example, let's say a husband comes home and says, "How was your day?" And the wife's response is like, "What do you think? You think I did nothing all day? I was busy all day. My day was very busy. Do you think my day wasn't busy?" That's a situation where obviously the wife wasn't listening to the question, or she was listening with her own perceptions and her misperceptions. And so we see the communication spiraling downward from that point. We also see the unmet expectations developing from a society that we live in today, where there is so much focus on what everyone else is doing. So when we flip through our Facebook feeds, when we're looking at our Twitter, or I think, Snapchat now, or Pinterest, I don't know if anyone Pinterests anymore, but for a while it was a thing, right? Or Tumblr, or whatever happens to be out there. But what we are seeing is, of course, the smiley pictures, the couples holding hands, the trip to Disney World, this vacation, that vacation. And we see that and we say, "Oh, look at that couple. They're so happy together. Look, they're all on vacation. They're doing this." But the reality is that the pictures that make it into our photo album, the photos that make it onto our news feed, those are just the points that puncture the marriage, the elements, the moments of enjoyment, the moments, the high points. But it's all of the pictures that don't make it into the photo album, all of the pictures that don't make it onto Facebook. That's what the marriage is really made of. And it's made of all those conversations that you've had over breakfast that you might have forgotten about. It's made of all those moments when someone might have made coffee for someone else. It's made of all those moments where the children might have been driving you crazy. It's made of all those moments of struggle, of difficulty, the ups and the downs. But they don't make it to our news feed. They don't make it to our photo albums. And when we fall into that trap of looking at what else is going on there, we begin to be very dissatisfied or discontented with what we may have at home. And of course, when we look at Hollywood and books and movies, they don't really help the situation. For a long time, when I would speak to youth about marriage and that topic, I'd put up a picture of the Twilight characters, Edward and Bella, and then, in the last few years, my daughter is like, Mom, that's so outdated. Like, nobody even looks at that anymore. But there was a time, where, and there's always new characters, new ideas that Hollywood puts out there. But there was a time where our youth would look to Bella and Edward, a young girl and a vampire, and be like, that's love. That's what I want my relationship to look like. And soon after, I think it was like Katniss and Peeta and Gale, and like all sorts of things going on there. And then there was other characters, and again, this Hollywood notion of what a relationship looks like. And of course, this is not of our deen. This is not of the description of marriage that we're given. It's not of the sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam either, where we see the relationship of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives as a relationship that's built upon mutual respect, a relationship that's built upon mutual support, a relationship that's built upon open and honest communication. So we see, for example, the example of Salama, who is someone who was very well respected and very known to be wise, one of the wives of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam faced a difficult situation with the Sahaba, he went to Salama and she asked him what's wrong. And she explained to him the situation. And Salama listened to what he had to say. And she responded and gave him advice. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course, his response was not, this is a business matter, this has nothing to do with you, you're not going to know the answer to this. He actually acted upon the advice of Salama. And we see it in example after example, that mutual recognition. We see the relationship between the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Sittina Khadija radiallahu anha, where there's a really interesting line that was written in a book called The History of God by an author named Karen Armstrong. And in her book, she talks about the monotheistic religions, and she talks about the history of the monotheistic religions. And she's not a Muslim, but when she described the beginning of Islam, she says in that chapter, Islam is the only religion that was born in the lap of a woman. And when her book first came out, the Muslim community was up in arms. They're like, what is she saying? What does she mean? Is she demeaning Islam? And so she gave an interview explaining, and she said, I was actually very fascinated by the fact that Islam is the only religion that when the revelation came to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he came down that mountain, shaking and shivering and not sure what was happening, his first thought was not to go to his cousin, to go to his friend. His first thought was to go to his wife, Sittina Khadija radiallahu anha. And in her lap, as he shivered and he said, cover me, and relayed to her the revelation, it was Sittina Khadija radiallahu anha who told him, you are good to your family, you are kind to the neighbors, you care for the orphans, surely your Lord will never forsake you. And she said this was the start of support from a spouse that supported her husband in every way, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And we know that that was reciprocated, that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed that mutual respect and that mutual support as well to Sittina Khadija. And over we see this connection between what the true marriage relationship should look like by following the sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is reciprocal. One of my favorite narrations about the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam's relationship with Sittina Aisha radiallahu anha was when she was relaying after the death of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam a situation in which there was a weapons demonstration in the masjid. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked her if she'd like to watch. And she said she stood behind the Rasul and he kind of shielded her. And she said she stood with her arms encircling his waist and with her chin resting upon his shoulder and her cheek resting upon his cheek. And she said after some time, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked her, have you seen enough? And she said, I answered, not yet. And she said, he waited patiently. And then he asked again, have you seen enough? And again she said, not yet. And again he waited patiently. And in relaying the situation, she said, Wallahi, I had no interest in watching the demonstration, but I love to stand so close to the beloved Messenger of Allah with my arms encircling his waist and my chin resting upon his shoulder, and my cheek upon his cheek. This is what a marriage relationship looks like. This is what a reciprocal relationship looks like. Not Bella and Edward or, Romeo and Juliet. This is what the love that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran looks like in the marriage relationship. So what's happening in our communities? Why are we not seeing this type of a connection? So what we've been noticing, especially in our counseling centers, is that the demise of marriages or the difficulties that people are running into in their marriages can be categorized in 5 different areas. The first area that we are seeing an increase in terms of difficulties is the area of domestic violence. Now, often when we talk about domestic violence, we think, oh, that's physical abuse. But when we cover the topic of domestic violence, it incorporates many different forms of abuse, whether that abuse is emotional abuse, if it's financial abuse, or it's physical or verbal abuse. And this is happening in a lot of our marriages. Why? Because when the communication level is at a point where it turns into a situation of communicating out of anger, communicating in a way that does not follow the realm of mawadda, rahma, care, and mercy at all, then it can turn into some form of abuse. And so there are many situations in which that nafs, that ego, can get a hold of someone, particularly in the marriage relationship. And when that nafs gets a hold of that person, and that person feels that I am right, I have to be right, they may resort to some form of abuse. And none of these abuses, again, whether it's physical, emotional, verbal, or financial even, are of our deen. None of them make for a healthy relationship. And we know that Islamically speaking, none of us should be silent when there is oppression, even if that oppression is against us in the marriage relationship. And if this is something that you're experiencing, there is help. There is programs, and one of the programs that we're going to be doing this weekend, as I said, the marriage training, part of that is anger management as well, and that's something that we could probably all benefit from, recognizing how to control our anger, because many times domestic violence can begin from that place of anger, yet it can also turn into something systematic, which occurs and the abuse occurs even when there is no anger present. So one of the second categories that we see quite frequently, and we're seeing more and more frequently these days, is the situation of unfaithfulness or infidelity. And this is a big topic. It's not one that we talk about frequently in our communities. It's not one that we like to touch upon, but it's an important topic. And the types of infidelity we're seeing these days is not just always physical infidelity, but also emotional infidelity, emotional cheating. Because of the ease of access, because of the ability to talk to someone through texting, through Facebook, through social media, through many different forms, not just in the workplace anymore, not just after hours, but to cross those boundaries of gender relations, to cross the boundaries of haya, of modesty, we are seeing that happen more and more frequently in relationships today. And it's difficult because there are many situations in which we let our guard down. Now, when shaitan comes to someone, it's not necessarily a whispering in the ear of, oh, you should have an affair or you should cheat on your spouse. No, it usually comes little by little. And one of the stories of our tradition from our deen is the story of Barsis, who was a monk who was well known in his community to be very trustworthy, to be someone that people would trust them with their most valuable items and their family members. And so there were brothers that were going to fight in a war, and they had a very beautiful sister. And they went to Barsis and they said, we want to entrust her to your care. And so initially Barsis said, oh no, I don't want to. This is too much of a responsibility. And yet they began to flatter him. And they began to say, oh, but you're so good and you're so trustworthy. And Barsis started to think, well, I am good, I am trustworthy. And he said, okay. Now Barsis, as someone who is monotheistic, as someone who is known to worship Allah, to worship the one God, at the time he would always think, I would never bow down to shaitan. I would never fall down that path. And so he said, I will take care of your sister, but I will keep her in a home across the street from mine or nearby to mine. And so he kept the sister in the home. And then little by little, shaitan would come to him and say, you should bring her some food. So initially he would leave some food in front of the door. And then little by little, shaitan would come to him and say, you should really bring the food inside the home and talk to her. She's probably lonely. So again, he was thinking, well, I'm doing a good thing. I'm going to go take care of her. I'll just go inside for a little bit. And little by little, of course, shaitan allowed the guard to drop more and more. And eventually, Barsis did commit zina with the young woman. And she carried a child, and again shaitan came to him and said, what are you going to do now? The town is going to know, your reputation, people are going to know you're not trustworthy. And so he killed both the sister and the child and buried the infant and the young woman in the floorboards of the home. And he built like a makeshift grave. When the brothers came home, he said, your sister passed away of illness, and he showed them where the makeshift grave was. Of course, they were taken with grief and they were very upset. And when they went to their own homes in a dream, it was revealed to them that their sister had not died of illness. So they went back to Barsis, they pulled up the floorboards, they found her body, they found the body of the infant, and they knew what had happened. And so they stood in front of Barsis and they said, we will ruin you, we will tell the town what you've done, and we will take revenge. And so as they were about to raise a knife to him, shaitan came again to Barsis and said, if you bow down to me, then I will help you in this situation. And Barsis, who had been so conscious of God, who had been so trustworthy, who had been so careful of his actions in that moment, chose to bow down to shaitan. And of course he was killed, and of course at that point shaitan said, this is between you and Allah, and then there's no help there. So we see that when we fall into the pitfall of infidelity, of emotional cheating, it's never with the intention of this is the course I'm going to embark on. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us our hudud, has given us our barriers, our boundaries of modesty and interaction for a reason. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us better than we know ourselves. And so following those boundaries of modesty, even after marriage, is so important. And we're seeing a lot of our guard dropping at times because of the ease of communication and the ease of interaction. So we talked about domestic violence, we talked about unfaithfulness or infidelity. The third case that we are seeing quite frequently is actually with the older generation of empty nesting. And empty nesting is when people who have been married with each other for quite some time have focused all of their energy on raising the children, on focusing on the family, and not necessarily on developing their relationship as a couple. So that when the children are older, maybe they're in college, maybe they're getting married, starting their own families, the couple no longer feels that they have anything in common because they've spent so much time developing the relationship with the children and not enough time developing a relationship with one another. And so we are seeing much more frequency in terms of the empty nesting syndrome of people divorcing after many, many years of marriage, after the kids are older, because there is that lack of connection at an earlier stage. The next situation that we see quite frequently in terms of the breakdown in marriage or the demise in marriage is the situation of a culture clash or differences in terms of worldviews, differences in terms of upbringings, differences in terms even sometimes of ethnicity or language spoken. And it's interesting because we know, of course, in our deen that there is no difference in terms of races in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam reminds us in his last sermon that, no one race has superiority over another race. Yet within marriages sometimes when when people are coming from two different backgrounds, there can arise that tension if the relationship is not built on a mutual respect, a mutual understanding, and an ability to communicate and hear one another, to really listen and understand, to really connect with one another and recognize that yes, there may be differences in your upbringing, but there is something greater that binds you together. And that thing that's greater, that binds you together, needs to be the love of one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It needs to be that connection with one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that tides us through in our marriages regardless of what we may be going through. Because when we marry someone at age 21, 22, 23, that person is not going to look the same at age 50, 60, 65, 70, inshallah. That person is going to change, and that goes for both, husband and wife. Yet again, sometimes we anticipate or expect that those changes may not happen. It's not only in terms of looks, but also in terms of personality, in terms of character, in terms of what they may be going through in life. Those changes occur. If we love a person because of that person, then that love is very ephemeral. It won't be anchored to anything greater. But if we love a person for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then when we have those moments where we turn over, and we look at the person next to us, and maybe they've got like messy morning hair, or they've got morning breath, or they need to shave, male or female, and you're like, wow, this is not what I expected. If we love the person just for the person that they are, then in that moment, our feelings may shift. But if we love someone for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we know that even in that moment, even in an argument when we're upset at them, that smile that we give is a sadaqah, and it's something that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That kindness, that care, that connection that we have with our spouse in that moment is something that draws us nearer and nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was an interesting scenario when I was writing one of my earlier books, When Muslim Marriage Fails. It was about the topic of divorce. And I sent out a survey, and I was looking for couples who were going through breakups, who were going through difficulty in their marriages, who were on the brink of divorce. And I received a message from a couple, an older couple, who had been married for almost 50 years. And they said, we heard about your study, we want to be a part of it. And I was very upset because I said, oh, you've been married 50 years and you're getting divorced? And so the woman reached out to me and she said, no, we're fine. We just want to tell you how it's done. So I was like, okay. So I met with the couple, and they were the type of couple that, they finish each other's sentences, and, they have this connection, and you could feel it right from the get-go. And so I turned to them and I said, okay, what is it? What's the secret? What has kept you two together and in a relationship that clearly shows that connection? And so the woman responded, I expected her response to be our iman, our love for Allah, our faith. We pray together every day. But she gave me a one-word response, and she said, Post-its. And I was like, wait, Post-its? What do you mean? So she said, when we had first gotten married, we wanted to leave each other notes. And so I would sometimes leave him, a piece of notebook paper on the table, or he would leave me one on the counter, and the notes would fall, or we didn't get it, or we'd forget to read each other's notes. And she said, then in the 1980s, they invented Post-its. She said, since the invention of Post-its, there hasn't been a single day that we haven't left each other a note somewhere. So I'm like, what are these notes? What do you write in these notes? And so the man said, well, I might leave a sticky on her pillow that says, I'm mad at you, but I still love you and I always will. The woman said, I might leave a note on the dashboard that says, I'm still laughing about that joke you told yesterday. The man said, I might leave her a note, on the refrigerator that says, your eyes are still as beautiful as ever. And, subhanAllah, it made me realize, as talking to them, that as much as today we have our phones, we have our iPads, we have our iPods, we have all forms of communication, different forms of communication, we probably communicate less with our spouses and our family members that we love today than ever before. And I usually do this exercise, and it's always interesting, the result, but I'm going to ask all of you to do it now too, If you are married, take out your phone and text your spouse. And text them one reason why you love them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Text them something. For those of you who are not married, text your parents. Right? Reach out to your mom, reach out to your dad, reach out to your closest friend, reach out to a sister, reach out to a brother. Everyone should be texting right now. This is like the one time in a lecture you're allowed to text, okay? Reach out and text someone why you love them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we don't do that enough. Maybe it's something about them that you think about, but you don't always say. Now, it's interesting. The last time that I did this in a lecture where the men were separate from the women, and I had asked the men to call their wives, and as soon as they sent the text, I tell them text a message. Half the phones in the room started ringing, and I'm like, what's going on? And you hear all of the men answering, no, honey, I didn't do anything wrong, I promise. And it was so interesting because we don't do this frequently enough. And so when we do reach out to connect with our spouse, with our parents, with a sister, with a brother, with a close friend, to connect with something other than go get the milk, or you forgot to take out the garbage again, or what are you doing tomorrow, or a K, or all of the other LOL, or whatever the other abbreviations are, we've lost that ability to connect on a deeper level. We've lost that ability to communicate in a way that's meaningful, because we've gone into this mode of communicating in spurts and bursts that are functional rather than emotional. So we got so far up to the fourth situation. Now we're up to the fifth situation. The fifth situation that we see that causes a lot of difficulty in marriages, and that has been causing a lot of marriages to end, unfortunately, is kind of like the catch-all category. And that's the category of stress. And when we talk about stress, of course, it's introduced in different ways and different forms in our relationships. But how we manage that stress and how we respond to it can make all the difference in the world. That stress may be coming from our parents or our in-laws. That stress may be coming from our children. That stress may be coming from our jobs. That stress may be coming from financial difficulties, economic difficulties. That stress may be coming in terms of our arguments about tarbiyah. That stress may be coming in terms of our arguments about what we're going to eat for dinner, or who did what last. But whatever that catch-all, that stress, wherever it's coming from, it can eat away at a relationship if it's not addressed. It can eat away at a relationship if in the couple it becomes a situation where one person is kind of pointing out what's wrong in the relationship all of the time, and the other person winds up shutting down or shutting off, not listening anymore. Or it can become a serious factor when both partners constantly want to unload about the stress, constantly want to talk about what the stress is. And what we often see in those situations of high stress is that there's a lot of pointing that goes on. And that pointing is, you did this wrong, or we are in this situation because of you, or our son is doing this because of you. And of course, when we point like this, there are three fingers that are pointing back at ourselves. And that's the point where we need to step back and ask ourselves, what could I do better? What can I manage? What can I change? Because rather than constantly trying to change the other person, it's about changing ourselves and becoming the best version of ourselves that we can be with our spouses. And it's hard to do, because a lot of times we enter our marriage relationships thinking, well, I'm going to be myself. This is the place where I can totally be myself. And a lot of times that being myself may include being cranky, being grumpy, being in a bad mood, which is understandable. But the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam reminds us that the best of you is the best to his family, and I am the best to mine. And that's in an authentic hadith. Now, how many of us actually practice that hadith? How many of us can honestly say that we apply that we save our best smile for our spouse, that we save our nicest voice for our children, that we save our kindest gestures for our parents? A while back, my husband and I were in a mall together shopping, and we happened to see a brother and his family from the community. And I often share this story, and the brother knows that I share it, so he's okay with it. But we saw the brother from a distance, and my husband said, oh, let's go say salam to fulan, to so-and-so. And so I said, okay. So we started heading towards him, and we saw that he was like very frazzled, and he was kind of yelling at his kids, and in Arabic he's like, "Khallasuni," yani you're taking forever. This is taking so long, and he's shouting at his wife, "Khalas, kifaya," "Gatkum al-araf," and a lot of other things that he was saying, And so we hesitated a little, but we continued to approach. And then from the opposite side of the store, there was someone that was approaching, a female co-worker, one of his colleagues at work. And as she approached, he said, "Oh, hi, so-and-so." And so his face kind of changed, and he turned to her and he said, "Oh, hi, Joni, let me introduce you to my beautiful wife and my beautiful children." And they're all talking, and the children are beautiful, and the wife is beautiful. And then, Joni kind of walked off, and then he turned again to his children. He's like, "Gatkum al-ham, khallasuni ba'a, hatishtiru al-mahalla kullu." And he started kind of shouting at them again. And we approached him, and then my husband jokingly, kind of pointed out. And we talked about it, and we realized that this is something that we all do, that we have this external face sometimes, that we share with our colleagues, that we share with our co-workers, that we share with our community members, that we share in the masjid. But then when we go home, we have a different face. When we go home, we have a different voice. We have a different way of interacting. And we'll often think to ourselves that, well, this is my husband, or this is my wife. She should be able to put up with me. I've had a long day at work, or he should be able to handle it. I've been running around all day long. He should know how difficult it is. And we have this expectation that we don't have to be the best to our families. We can be the worst to our families, and it's okay. But the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam reminds us the best of you is the best to your families. And so that's the part of ourselves that we need to always showcase to our families, to be with our families, to present that to our families. There was a movie quite some time ago called Jerry Maguire, and I don't know if you're familiar with that movie or not, but there was a very famous line in that movie. For those of you who are like a little older, do you know what the famous line is in Jerry Maguire? Someone say, "Show me the money," over here. Usually the guys will say that, and then I'll get the great line. That wasn't the line I was thinking of, yeah. "You complete me," exactly. It's like Tom Cruise is on one side of the room and the actress is on the other, and they look at each other, and he looks at her, he's like, "You complete me." And that's the part where the audience is all like, "Aww." But that's what we do in our marriages sometimes. We expect that the other person is going to complete us. We expect that if we're not happy with where we are in life, it's up to the other person, it's up to our spouse to make us happy. If we're not as religious as we'd like to be, it's up to our spouse to get us to be more religious. If we're not as XYZ as what we're supposed to be or what we want to be, then our spouse should be getting us there. Our spouse should be doing that. As beautiful as it is to wake up for Fajr together, husband and wife, as beautiful as it is to pray Salat al-Isha together as a family before putting the kids to bed, it's not enough to expect your spouse to be that completion of you, to be the one that initiates, that pushes you. This is where we have to look internally, and we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What can I do better? What can I change? How can I make a difference in my relationship? How can I make a difference in my family, in my home? And when we begin to take responsibility for our own actions, we can see those changes manifest around us. Several years ago, there was a couple who came to us, and they were having a lot of difficulties. And again, this story is shared with the permission of that couple. And they were struggling because the husband said, when they had first gotten married several years ago, they were both kind of on the same level where, they liked the community, they were cultural, but they weren't necessarily super religious. And the husband had recently had kind of this connection that he felt, a spiritual awakening, I guess, and he felt this connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he was praying not just, the fard, but he was praying every sunnah. He was getting up for tahajjud every night, and he was feeling very motivated. And he wanted his wife to be the same, but she wasn't there. And they were fighting consistently about this. Excuse me. And so he said, I want my wife to be more religious. And as he spoke to us, we actually directed him to our imam to speak to him as well. And, the imam told him, leave your wife alone. Just focus on you. Stop pushing her. Stop telling her what to do. And he said, you're not allowed to talk to your wife about anything that has to do with the religion. And so the man said, okay. And so he made an appointment for 6 weeks from that date. Excuse me. It's been a long day. Alhamdulillah. So he made an appointment for 6 weeks after that day. And he came to us 6 weeks later, and he was a changed man. And we said, what's going on? You know, your marriage is better? And he said, I stopped talking to my wife about the religion. And suddenly I would be praying, and I'd find her praying next to me. I'd be fasting, and I'd find that she was fasting too. And he's like, I don't know what happened. So we turned to the wife and we asked her, you know, so what happened? And she said, well, I started noticing how much better of a person you had become when you really started focusing on yourself rather than nagging me. And I wanted that for myself. And we thought that was a beautiful way of looking at ourselves before trying to change someone else. So I think my choking means that we should probably wrap up. So Jazakumullah khair, and I'll turn it to Imam Abdul Malik, or okay, I'll turn it to someone else to speak as I continue to cough. Jazakumullah khair, I apologize. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم again for those who are here in the first half and for those who are just coming in now or who just came in after Maghrib. So before we get to the questions, or as the questions generate, since we don't have any just yet, I'll just give a brief, quick summary for those of you who might not have been here during the first part of the talk of what we talked about, and then just really open it up to any questions that you might have. So we covered the importance of communication within marriage. We covered the importance of expectations, of understanding what marriage really is as described in the Quran, what it is based on the Sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and what it's not. We spent a little bit of time talking about the importance of listening, of understanding ourselves, of having that connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and loving someone for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when we anchor our love in the person, then we are going to be disappointed, or we're going to have unmet expectations. But when we view our marriages as a place of tranquility, where we are seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the kindness and the care that we show to our spouse, then we build a strong foundation, then we build a relationship that lasts. We also spoke about 5 categories or situations that we often see difficulties or struggles in marriages that may lead to divorce. And those situations were domestic violence in many of its forms, whether the abuse is emotional, physical, verbal, or financial. We spoke about unfaithfulness or infidelity, both emotional cheating and physical cheating. We spoke about culture clashes and the difference of upbringing, the difference of worldview, and trying to place your perception on the person that you are with. We spoke about stress and the difficulties that can come along with tarbiyah, raising of our children, the difficulties that may come along from financial or economic stress, the difficulties of stress from the workplace, from society, from many different places. And we also spoke about empty nesting, or the difficulty in connecting as a couple, husband and wife, after the children are grown older and have left the home. So we gave some examples, different situations and scenarios of the importance of looking internally and inwardly, of really understanding that in the marriage relationship, we can only change our actions and our reactions to situations. We cannot change the person that we're with. And changing our actions and reactions can often lead to something that is better in the marriage situation. And we spoke about the importance of course, when we point one finger that way, we turn 3 fingers towards ourselves and see what we can do better, how we can be better. I think we got our first question. So we'll take a look at the first question, and as the questions come in, we can discuss further. We've got a couple of questions now, alhamdulillah. Okay. So the first question is a very good one. It says, can you talk about gender relations briefly? So I'm going to direct this first towards the pre-marriage of how do we carry ourselves, how do we react to the opposite gender when we are in that stage of pre-marriage. Maybe we feel that we're of age to get married, we are seeking marriage, maybe it's remarriage, but there is a situation where we would like to get married. We're living in a difficult time because it's a time where, again, the boundaries have kind of been blurred, particularly from the online realm, where many times things that we may never say face-to-face to someone, we might feel comfortable sending a DM or sending a message on Facebook Messenger or receiving those types of messages at times, or maybe an email. And studies have shown that there's something called a courage juice that happens when we're behind a screen, where we may let our guard drop and we may wind up going down a path of lack of modesty and interaction that we may not do face-to-face. Now, the difficulty with what's happening today with gender relations is we are often raising our children in a situation where we may tell them, okay, in the masjid, of course, the women are on one side, the men are on the other side. In the community dinners, though, that might carry over. Again, the men are on one side, the women are on one side. In learning situations, again, men on one side, women on the other side, which, of course, respectfully speaking, and of course for the elements of haya and modesty, it's important to do that. But what winds up happening is in our classrooms, in the college atmosphere, in the workplace, the men and the women are not on one side and the other. The men and the women are interacting and they're together and they're in the same realm. So teaching our children haya in interaction from a young age is incredibly important. Many times I'll be in college programs, and in the MSAs, we'll see again the brothers and the sisters completely separate, and assalamu alaikum, or sometimes looking down. But Muhammad might see Amina coming from a distance, and again, Amina says assalamu alaikum. Muhammad kind of looks down, astaghfirullah. But then, Anne comes over and Muhammad's like, hey, Anne, what up? How's it going? And Amina's like, dude, I just said salam, And it's something that's happening quite frequently in our college campuses because we haven't necessarily equipped our youth with that element of haya, of understanding how to interact with the opposite gender without crossing those boundaries, whether that opposite gender is a male Muslim or a non-Muslim male, and vice versa, whether it's a female Muslim or a female non-Muslim. So maintaining that haya in interactions is so important. Learning that haya in interactions is important. Recognizing that there is, of course, we know that the smile is sadaqah, but there's a difference between, smiling at John and smiling at John, and recognizing, of course, that haya, that modesty is something that we carry within us in our interactions with the opposite gender, and it's something we should maintain whether in the masjid or outside of the masjid, whether we are on opposite sides of the room or we're working in an office and our desks are close by and everyone's in the office together. But consistently maintaining that haya in our interaction, in the way that we talk, in the way that we walk, in the way that we interact, in the way that we dress, in the way that we carry ourselves. And that's really at the core of gender relations. Now we carry that into the marriage realm. Frequently, once we are married, we feel like, hey, I'm off the market. It's okay, I can talk to so-and-so, I can interact with so-and-so. But our gender relations and that haya and that modesty needs to be maintained, again, whether in the marriage or outside of a marriage relationship. Because once we are married, that doesn't mean that we have free reign now to interact with the opposite gender because we're off the market. No, that sense of modesty, that haya, still has to be there. And it's something that we should try to inculcate in our children as well. All right, so the next question we have is, what if you can't even attract anyone for marriage in the first place? Okay, so this kind of ties into gender relations as well, you know. Our nasib, the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for us to be with, he's out there, or she's out there. That nasib is out there, inshallah, you know, and maybe if our nasib is not necessarily in marriage, maybe our nasib is in something else. But sometimes when this question is saying, what if you can't even attract anyone for marriage? The question becomes, do you know yourself? And do you know what you're looking for? Again, when we look at the example of Sittina Khadija radiallahu anha, we see that she was a woman who was widowed, who knew what she was looking for in terms of character, who knew what she was seeking in terms of a life partner. She wanted someone who was honest, someone who was trustworthy, someone who was kind. And when she would hear back about Al-Amin, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his trades for her company as he would travel and interact with others, and she would hear about his kindness, about his honesty, about his fair dealings, she knew that this was what she wanted, what she was looking for in a life partner. And so she had her relative go speak to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But again, we see the beauty of hayat in that interaction. You know, the relative did not go to the Rasul and say, ooh, I know someone who likes you, or, you know, tweet about it, or no. She asked the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what do you think of marriage? And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded and said, when the opportunity and the time comes, I will marry. And so the relative said, and what do you think of Hadrat Khadija? And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his humility and his humbleness, you know, looked down and said, oh, she is far above me in status. And so the relative just nodded and said, you should consider Khadija. And in that way, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew that if he were to propose to Sittina Khadija radiallahu anha, she would accept. So we see when someone is saying, what if you can't even attract anyone for marriage? This is where we must stop and ask ourselves, what are we looking for? What is it that I seek in a partner? What is it that would connect me with someone? What is it that I am looking for that I know will draw me closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Someone that I can love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once you've understood your own character and where you are in life and what you're seeking, then go through the process. Don't wait, you know, we've been conditioned, particularly as young women, we've been conditioned to think that, you know, we have to sit on the side and wait for Prince Charming to come along on his white horse. Prince Charming is not coming on his white horse. That's not how it works. When we know what we're seeking, when we know the character, this is the point where we take the steps, the actions to really find that character that we're looking for. So for example, you know, now inshallah in the masjid here in ISBCC, there will be a lot of work towards the premarital engagement and that process. At Cornerstone, for example, we have a program called Cornerstone Connections, which is a database that, you know, we kind of try to match people up from all over the US and now abroad as well, internationally, where we look at what people are looking for, we try to match them up. We do an email introduction. Once there is interest through the email introduction, we will schedule a Skype call or an in-person visit if they are in the state. So there are steps, there are processes that we can follow. We may belittle the whole idea of the rishta auntie or, you know, telling so-and-so that I'm looking, but this is the process of seeking out. You know, we're not picking out just a dress that we're going to wear once or an outfit we're going to wear once. This is our life partner. This is the person that inshallah we will spend time with in dunya and in akhirah, bismillah, hopefully in Jannah, walking together hand in hand. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. All right, the next question. If my wife is not following the correct hijab, how can I convince or change her to do so? I know we spoke about changing ourselves rather than changing our spouse. So, you know, it's interesting because, again, it's kind of the topic that we ended with in our last talk. You know, a lot of times we spend so much time focusing on what our spouse is doing wrong that not only do we neglect what we may be doing wrong, but we tend not to see what our spouse is doing right. You know, there's the saying that you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. This is where we have to kind of stop and say, what are you saying to your wife? Is it constant belittlement or pointing out the flaw or saying, okay, I don't like what you're wearing, this is tight, this is showing, this is, you know, there is a difference between nasiha that is given with kindness in private in a way that shows that it's coming from a place of love and criticism. Because criticism comes from a place of superiority, of ego. Criticism comes from a place where you want to point out the flaws and you're doing this rather than looking at those three fingers back at you. This doesn't mean that we can't give our spouses nasiha or advice. Of course, that's incumbent upon us to give that nasiha for our spouses because we want to be together, insha'Allah, in pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the akhirah, insha'Allah. But again, how are we doing it? Check your tongue first. Check how you're saying things and when you're saying it. If it's every time your wife goes out, you stop her and say, I don't like what you're wearing, or go change, this isn't good, this is revealing, this I don't like. Obviously that the reaction you're going to get is one that is probably going to be opposite than what you're looking for. But imagine now if your wife, comes home and you tell her, you look absolutely lovely every day, However, I absolutely love when you wear this specific abaya, or look, I purchased this outfit for you because I think it would be beautiful on you. When you wear your hijab and you cover your hair, your face radiates nur, or whatever it is. Or when you please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way that you dress, it brings my heart ease because I know we're going to be together in Jannah, inshallah. Okay? And opening up in terms of your communication with your spouse, rather than criticizing, rather than being negative all of the time. We do this with our children quite frequently as well too, where our child might come home with, a 92 on a test, and the reaction might be, excuse me. Our reaction might be, why is it not 100? You could have done better. You didn't study hard enough, rather than providing encouragement. And with our spouses, it should be the same thing, that we provide encouragement, that we ask ourselves, how are we saying things? And how can we draw our spouses nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and nearer to us as those who love the spouse for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? All right, can you please provide simple steps that can be taken to strengthen marriage on a daily basis? All right, so one of the things that we talked about quite frequently today is communicate, communicate, communicate. But communicating does not mean talking. It's not always the more you talk, the better your marriage will be. In some cases, the less you talk, the better. Listen, listen, listen. The art of listening is an art that we've lost, Listen and understand what your spouse is saying, rather than constantly trying to prove your point, rather than trying to push what you want to say on your spouse. There's something that we implemented in our own home many years ago, and it's something that we kind of encourage others to do as well, and it's called 5-minute time. And what 5-minute time is when our children were younger, and it was hard to kind of navigate time with each child, my husband and I bought an egg timer, and we started going into each of our children's room individually. So I would go into my daughter's room first with the egg timer. I would set the egg timer to 5 minutes, and I would tell my daughter, during those 5 minutes, you can say anything you want, and I'm just here to listen. And then my husband would go into her room, then I would go into my son's room, and then we'd keep doing the 5-minute, 5-minute. And so we realized that as they grew older, they would look forward to their 5-minute time. So now, when my daughter, who's starting college in the fall, inshallah, will come into the car and I'll be like, oh, how was your day? She'll be like, oh, I'll tell you during 5-minute time, And she knows that that's the time where I'm going to listen, and I'm not going to comment, I am just going to listen, and then we'll talk about whatever's going on later on. And we realized as the children got older that we were spending this 5-minute time with each of our children, but we didn't have 5-minute time for ourselves. And so we began implementing the 5-minute time rule with ourselves as well. And, alhamdulillah, the 5-minute time went to 10 minutes, and now it's at 15 minutes. We may cut it back to 10, but it's at 15-minute time now. And during that time, there's no cell phones, no laptops, no television, no children, and it's really just time. So I get my 15 minutes or so with my husband first, and I can say anything that's on my mind. And then he gets his 15 minutes, and I have to listen to him. And maybe, you know, my husband's a business owner, so maybe he just wants to talk to me about some new sauce that he made or something that's happening in the business. And I have to listen, you know. But it's not just I have to listen, I want to listen. And it goes vice versa. And that's how we build that sense of communication with our families in our homes. So one very active step that can be taken is implement 5-minute time in your home. Find that time to connect away from distractions, no phones, no cars, no laptops, no televisions. You can spare that time. Of course, something that, you know, is fundamental and core in any relationship is the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that may mean making sure that you pray at least one salah together as a family. You know, maybe husband, wife come home late from work. It's difficult to coordinate for Salat al-Isha. Kids sleep early. Maybe Salat al-Dhuhr is not going to work out because everyone's doing different things. But maybe it's Salat al-Fajr. Waking up together as a family with your spouse and starting the day off praying together. As your children grow older, maybe allowing your sons to lead the salah, to give the adhan, maybe allowing your daughters to make the dua after that salah, but centering your life around that worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's what we've been created for. So of course that's a core tenet of having that connection between husband and wife, and then building on it by communicating and really listening to each other. All right. The next question says, regarding marrying somebody from another country, will this be a challenge for marriage success? Is it better to marry someone from the same country or the same culture? Okay, so, you know, there's a saying that we have in Egypt that marriage is like a watermelon, that you never really know what you're going to get until you cut into it. And, you know, it's to a certain extent it's true. You know, I could sit here and tell you, oh, you should definitely marry someone from the same culture, or I could tell you, no, if you marry someone from a different culture, it's more enriching. Every case is different. Every case is unique. But what we found is that different worldviews tend to lead to more difficulty and conflict in marriage. So what's a worldview? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming from a different background or different ethnicity. There could be two individuals, for example, let's say someone whose family comes from Turkey and someone else whose family comes from Iran. And both of the youth, though, that are about to get married were born and raised in the US. They will probably have more of a closely assimilated worldview than if someone whose parents were born in Pakistan, both parents were born in Pakistan, for example, but the children grew up, or the youth grew up in two different states, two different environments. One home was very religious, the other home was more cultural. One home was very strict in upbringing, the other home was very open and comfortable with pushing boundaries. That couple will have a harder time connecting and reaching commonality because they have different worldviews than the couple that may have backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. So it's hard to predict, but what we can say in terms of prediction of marriage success is the more you know about your deen, about marriage, about expectations, about communication before marriage, the more likely you will be able to start off on the right foot and to continue to grow together. But marriage, like, you know, anything in life, requires work, and it requires upkeep, and it requires consistently revisiting, learning, growing, understanding that you're changing together. All right, so Okay, so a Muslim woman attracted to a non-Muslim man, and vice versa, a non-Muslim man attracted to a Muslim woman. Okay, I am going to have Sheikh Yasser, wherever he is, speak about the fiqh of marrying for a Muslim woman and the ruling of not marrying a non-Muslim male. Because I know there was recently an article that caused quite a bit of stirring in one of the publications online stating that, well, it's okay for a Muslim woman to marry a non-Muslim man. So I'll request that Sheikh Yasser give a lesson about the fiqh and the ruling behind that, because I would prefer not to touch upon that. When we talk about different worldviews, religion, without a doubt, plays a role in that difference in worldviews. So marrying someone that has, and this is not from even an Islamic perspective, but from like a marriage book perspective, marrying someone that has a similar end goal in terms of faith is important to the success of a marriage. Okay? And I'll have Sheikh Yasser talk about the other topic. Okay, I'm wondering if there's any Islamic institutions or community that helps facilitate not only the young people but also older people who had previously been married and are now divorced or did not marry for finding a good spouse. Yes, Cornerstone. And inshallah, we do have, as I said, something called Cornerstone Connections, which is a database that tries to match couples. We have different segments for those who may have been divorced, those who are widowed, those who are young, those who are older. So feel free to visit our website. It's cornercounseling.com, and you can go into our Cornerstone Connections page. And Imam Abdul Malik, after this weekend, will have a lot more information about how that works as well, inshallah. Okay. Okay, when opposite genders talk, should it be strictly business only? Right, that's a really good question. So we've talked about modesty, we've talked about hayat, we've talked about how you carry yourselves. You know, we are given in our deen very specific guidelines about modesty. We are given very specific guidelines as to how to conduct ourselves, how to carry ourselves, how to interact. And there's a reason for that, because we are going to interact with one another. We are going to somehow in this world be at times with those of the opposite gender. But we are given those guidelines for a reason. So talking to someone of the opposite gender, and when we say should it be strictly business, again, there are going to be co-workers, there are going to be colleagues as we enter into a world where in many households today, men and women are working outside of the home. In many households today, of course, we're educating our daughters, we're encouraging them to go to school, to go to colleges, to earn their degrees. We're encouraging our boys to do the same. So that interaction is going to happen. How we talk about a subject is more important than the subject itself, because we can talk business, and again, there's a difference between smiling while talking business and smiling while talking business. So it's not the topic that matters, but it's the way in which we comport ourselves. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we broach subjects that have, you know, limited or no hayat, and we say, oh, it's okay because Sister Susie said it, just how you speak about it. No, we know the guidelines, we know our limits. The way that we interact with the opposite gender should always be, first and foremost, am I pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is my interaction here something that would be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If we are finding that we're interacting in a certain way because it's pleasing to our nafs, because it's making us feel good, or that, you know, there's a little bit of flirtation going on there and it's giving us a boost of confidence, then we have to stop and step back and ask ourselves, what is our purpose? You know, what direction are we going in? So again, it's the way that we carry ourselves, it's our nonverbals, it's the tone of voice, it's the volume, it's the way that we are interacting that's very important in terms of gender relations. And again, teaching our boys and girls from a young age how to interact with each other, not necessarily to separate completely and say don't ever talk to someone at the masjid, don't ever talk to someone of the opposite gender, and then throw them into mixed colleges, mixed schools, mixed workplaces, and expect them to know what to do. No, recognize that also the rules that are in place in face-to-face should be the same rules that guide us in our online interactions. So if there is something that is questionable that someone says to us or that we might say to someone, stop and ask yourself, would I say this face-to-face? And in terms of spouses, the rule of thumb when texting, speaking, interacting with the opposite gender, if you have to hide a text, an email, a Facebook message from your spouse, then you're probably not interacting with haya, right? So if you are comfortable with sharing any text message, email, interaction with your spouse, then again, you are probably okay as long as you know that you are pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of course that taqwa, that fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to be in everything. But a lot of times we slip into fearing our spouse and whether or not our spouse will find out rather than fearing Allah. So shifting our priorities, focusing on pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what should guide all of our interactions. And with that said, it is 9 o'clock, and I know I was asked to wrap up at 9 p.m. So I will wrap up here. Jazakum Allahu khair. It was wonderful being with your community. And feel free, I do have some cards. You're welcome to email me at any time if you have questions or connect with me at any other time. Inshallah, I'm planning to be here all weekend. I'll be at the picnic, I believe, on Sunday as well, inshallah. So I would love to speak with you all a little bit more then. Jazakum Allahu khair. Assalamu alaikum.